And we are live. Olá a todos. Hello everyone. Welcome to our first session of the day. We are now in the session Direito Autoral e Novas Tecnologias, or Copyright and New Technologies. And we are here with Professor Claudia Sende, Professor Nicholas Guggenberger, and Professor Manon. This session will be spoken in English, so I believe everyone here was already informed, and I will make a small intro of each speaker before he or her or she speaks, and I hope everyone enjoys the session as much as I'm certainly going to do, because we have very qualified professional, very qualified scholars to talk about each of the subjects. And to start and to get the real important part of our session, that's surely not me speaking, I'm going to introduce Professor Claudia Sende. Professor Claudia Sende is an associate professor of technology law and corporate law at the University of Padova. She is the director of Innovation and Technology Law Lab and co-founder and managing director of the Digital Law Network. She's a qualified lawyer since 2008, after graduating law in Padova in 2003. Professor Sende got a PhD at the University of Hara in 2009. And besides digital law, her areas of legal expertise includes corporate law and IP law. She's author of 2 books of impacts of technology and corporate governance in listed companies, an author of a book of fintech, and author also of many papers, lecturing in many foreign universities like Budapest, Leeds, Nottingham, and Barcelona. She's member of the faculty of the PhD program in corporate law and professor of European Union company law at UACS, member of the editorial board of some of the most important law journals in Italy, and she was also being the panel of the 2018 ELI conference in digital law, SIG, as one of the most renowned experts of IT law in Italy. I also had the pleasure of meeting her in a summer school I had in Italy. She is, besides all this extensive curriculum, amazing person. So you have the floor, and I'm very happy to have you here.
Thank you, Pedro, and thank you for this invitation. You know, it's a couple of years we would like to meet in Brazil, and today I think we succeeded, at least online, and I'm very happy. I hope this kind of cooperation can last. Online resources can really boost our international relations and widen our borders and academic borders. So I'm pleased to be here with those colleagues, and I will give a short lecture, I promise, on blockchain and copyright. Now I share my screen and show my PowerPoint, which will guide us, even because we are speaking in a foreign language for many of us. Okay, now you should be able to see my PowerPoint, and what I will do is to make a presentation. Okay, it should work, isn't it? Pedro, does it work?
Yes.
Everything is fine?
Yeah, everything is working correctly.
Okay.
We can see it clearly.
Okay, so as Pedro has already introduced me, now it's a time of exploring this topic. Blockchain are much discussed technology innovation, and it promises to inaugurate a new era of data storage and code execution. And the potential of blockchain is currently being experimented within many domains, included copyright law. And what I would like to underline during this short talk is that blockchain is not the panacea. It's not the buzzword that can solve everything. And in many papers, because since 2018 or 17, some papers have been published on this topic, and most of them focus on promises that actually can be realized, but in some parts I disagree with what has been written, because it's not all about blockchain, or blockchain cannot do something authors would like it to do, because it's a specific technology, and it has some features and some functions. It is not something that can give a solution for everything. So the main purpose of this talk is to understand what blockchain actually can do for copyright and what blockchain cannot do for copyright. So I'm not sure if all these, of course, from the technical point of view, I'm not sure if all the possible applications of blockchain are technically if technically they can be built but realized, but from the point of view of the law, it's important to understand what will be the effects in case we find a way to realize it. Okay, so the main purpose of the speech is to focus on this. Starting from blockchain is much more than a database. That's the starting point. I agree with those authors who wrote that blockchain has a great potential, because it's not like a common ledger. At the very end, blockchain, as its simplest, blockchain involves recording information in a way that creates trust in the information recorded. People say that it creates trust, but this is an important word. We have to remember it. What trust on what? On what? Because there are some misunderstanding on this word. People think that once a data is stored in the blockchain, then we trust at it. No, we trust the blockchain. Okay, so blockchain is a ledger. It means that it is a way of storage information. And so here is a nice picture I found about the evolution of ledgers from the most ancient to the most recent. And we have to, the final point is distributed ledger. What does it mean that it is not simple an informatic, a digital ledger, but it is a distributed one? It means that every data is stored on various nodes and maintained. So this means that the same information is stored in each computer. And according to this storage, which is decentralized, we have a lot of informations that can be found in each computer. And according to this, every person can watch at the information, can see the information. And this means that there is more transparency. Then another characteristic of distributed blockchain is that we have, it's almost impossible to modify what is written in the blockchain. So the blockchain is immutable. In the centralized ledger, the person, the authority who keeps the ledger has the chance to modify the ledger, but he doesn't do it normally because it's a trusted person. We normally say that blockchain is a technology with which can give trust in the sense that It's a trust machine. It's the technology itself which provides trustness. And that's an important point for what we will say later on. So with blockchain, we share and synchronize digital databases, and nobody can stop the blockchain because the blockchain is in all the nodes. So this is how blockchain works. According to this functioning, which is, I told it in a very simple and rude way, but just because I'm not actually interested in explaining in detail what blockchain is, most of you already know, and so it's not important to do. What is important to say is that blockchain was built for providing also data, tamper-proof to transactions, because blockchain is made for functioning even without any authority. So the fact of being built in blocks means that there is chronological order by the technology itself. So the technology is able to provide timestamping, meaning that something happened before something else. And that's an important point too, because some people think that blockchain is timestamping technology. It is, but it's something more and more than a stamping technology. So blockchain creates an indisputable digital trail of transactions, and that's important. So the main features of blockchain is disintermediation. It allows us to avoid to have a central authority. We can exchange information and be sure that nobody has changed it without the need of a central authority. Then transparency, because everybody can watch at the results of the blockchain. Security, because of the blocks, it is very difficult to attack blockchain. Immutability, because nobody can change the content of a block without changing everything. So without being, without other person to recognize that he has changed something. And this is another important feature is automation. For sure, you have heard about smart contracts. Well, smart contracts are established, are built, they work on the blockchain, and they have the characteristic, they can function in an automatic way. Basically, they are constructed on the idea of if-then. So if happens something, then the contract will execute another operation. So all these features are, so when we start thinking about blockchain and something else, in this case, copyright, I think we cannot forget those features. They are very important because we have always to consider how if we want to answer the question how blockchain can help that sector, we have to ask which feature is needed there. And now I will go into the details. This is just a picture showing that the hype of blockchain is away from us. I think it's gone, but that's better for us because it means that blockchain is not just Bitcoin, it's much more. But we have to understand what's the meaning of blockchain outside Bitcoin, because a lot of people say, okay, blockchain is not Bitcoin. That's true. That's true. It was born through Bitcoin, but now we know that that different blockchains can be built, and that not only Bitcoin can run over blockchain. But do never forget that Bitcoin and blockchain was a perfect marriage, because Bitcoin was built in the blockchain. It was something that outside the blockchain does not exist. And so this is something that makes blockchain of Bitcoin really special. And when we try to use that technology, but to physical objects or to objects that are not born in the blockchain, we have a problem. And with the copyright, we can have it, because not all the copyrighted works are digital, or they cannot be really digitalized. I think about paintings or something which is buildings or whatever, sculptures and so on. So we must be careful in saying that the blockchain of Bitcoin has the same features and functionalities outside the Bitcoin world. And I will now explain what I mean. I will start from this news in the World Intellectual Property Organization magazine. It's of July 2012, so it's very recent. And in this magazine, it's written that blockchain will transform the registration of IP rights and strengthening the protection of unregistered IP rights. So in this article, the Intellectual Property Organization stresses the importance of blockchain for strengthening the protection of unregistered IP rights. And in this context, I mean copyright first. And how can it strengthen the protection of copyright? How? Well, in this paper, in this article, we can read that blockchain technology can potentially assist with creating a register of unregistered IP rights, as it can easily provide evidence of the time of creation and rights management information, if applicable. So here is what I called a misunderstanding, because it is obviously true that blockchain, as it has a structure which is made of blocks, can help in registering the evidence of the time. But blockchain is much more. So it's not a meaning of giving tamper-proof. It's something more. And it's useful for following a track of transactions, not just to say that something existed. It's not a way for making a picture of something, but to follow the evolution of that asset. So I think that there are several easier technologies which can be used to provide prior use and or to give a proof that prior use or the existence of an asset or a copyright was before that time. And there are several easier technologies. So technologies which have which cost less, which have less problems. For example, blockchain is immutable. So if there is a controversy on authorship, there is a problem how we can change the data which are on the blockchain. We can't. So if the meaning of using blockchain is this one, then I would say blockchain is not the solution. It's too heavy and complicated, and so I would suggest to use something else. And here is the organization, the IP organization itself, which promotes another service. So on one hand, in July, they say, hey, look, we have a great innovation. We have blockchain for giving tamper-proof evidence, but they themselves have recognized that there can be an easier tool to reach the same goal, which is WIPO-proof. So what's WIPO-proof is? It's a global online service that generates tamper-proof evidence, proving that the digital file existed at a specific point in time. So every person can buy a WIPO-proof stamp on the WIPO-proof website, and then just uploading its file, it can receive a tamper-proof, a WIPO-proof. Okay. What is remarkable of this, which is that it is global, because many of you know that in Europe we have regulation on digital signature and tamper-proofs, and we have mutual recognition. So it means that if I have a service like that, and we have several startups offering services like that in Italy, then their service will be recognized in all Europe. But that's all. So if I want to have a proof, a tamper-proof evidence, which is good also for other countries outside Europe, then I think that this instrument, this tool, which is called WIPO-proof, is the best I can use. So going back to our slide, I think that if blockchain is seen just like a mean for giving tamper-proof evidence, I think it's not the correct one. There are better tools, easier and more suitable. Then in the WIPO magazine, there is another sentence that, according to me, is it's something that should be, we need to reflect on. A blockchain-based registry would only be useful if an authoritative and trusted third party, such as an IP office or a collective management organization, was involved. So in this magazine, the idea is to use the blockchain, but to use in a centralized way. Maybe you have heard about private blockchains. That is what the WIPO magazine suggests. So to have a private blockchain for keeping the registers, the national registers. And I must observe that one of the key features of blockchain is disintermediation. In a blockchain, no central authority is required to validate and verify the transaction because of the presence of the consensus protocol, which is a core part of any blockchain network. So at first sight, at least, knowing that someone wants to build a blockchain just for solving the tamper-proof evidence problem and giving this power to a central authority, I think it's not about blockchain. I mean, it's not revolutionary. It's not disruptive. And if this is the intersection between blockchain and copyright, it's a light innovation. It's something that it's not so wow, it's amazing. Okay, that's what I think. But luckily, there is much more. There is much more than this. What are the effective benefits of a blockchain-based registry for copyright? So, as I told you, I don't agree that it is for tamper-proof. So what can really blockchain do for copyright world, for the copyright environment? What copyright blockchain-based registry can and can't do? It can provide a tamper-proof evidence, but it's not so amazing. Okay. What it can't, definitely, it can't provide authenticity. That's an important point, because in many papers, people say that blockchain is a trust machine. So as it is a trust machine, everything which is in the blockchain, we can trust it. But that's not true, because there is a problem called garbage in, garbage out, which means that you trust that since the data was put into the blockchain, it is immutable. But you cannot say if the data that is in the blockchain is true, because nobody knows about it. This is a problem that Bitcoin does not have, because Bitcoin was born in the blockchain. But if you put a data which is outside the blockchain and you want to register on the blockchain, then we are not sure that what you have declared is true. So speaking about copyright, this means that blockchain cannot avoid the problem of paternity, of who is the author of the blockchain registered work, and so on. So blockchain cannot provide a solution for the authorship. And blockchain cannot avoid double spending, because again, some authors says that if we have registered a copyright in the blockchain, then double spending will not be possible. But that's not true, because we can transfer it also off-chain. So I have a copyright on a painting, on a book or something, and it is registered in the blockchain. But since the law allows me to transfer that right even outside the register, well, blockchain cannot do anything. So it would be different if the law would say that only transfers inside registered on the blockchain are valid. If we do this, in that case, we avoid double spending. But you know what? That we can do also today without, we don't need blockchain for starting this new rule of law. Because in Italy, for example, we have a register for copyrights, but you don't have to register transfer of assets or of copyrights or licenses or whatever. You can even do not register. It's better to register, but you don't have to. So I think that to avoid double spending, legislative reform is needed more than a technology. Okay, no technology can solve those problems. But using technology and using blockchain in particular can be useful to do something else, which is to increase transparency, because everybody in the world can see at the blockchain and see who is the author of a copyrighted work, or who is the licensee, and so on. So it increased transparency because everybody can have access to it, even from distant part of the world. It increased capital rising opportunities for authors, because as you see in the picture here downstairs in the corner, you see that when you register something, a painting, the second one is a painting in the blockchain, and then you get a token. You can also decide to share that token in 1,000 small tokens, which means that through blockchain, we have the opportunity for authors to raise a lot of capital among the public, giving them a token on the revenues. So people who are interested, they can invest in future or present copyrights. They can buy a share in copyright in a way. And the third opportunity given by blockchain is to reduce piracy. How? Well, as blockchain is available to everybody, if we are able, that's a technical problem. But if we were able to upload on the blockchain the digital work in their entire, so in their full, completely, I mean, not just a hash, but for the entire file, then everybody can immediately see if the person who is uploading something on the web is also the author or not. You know that YouTube has a function which is called the Content ID. Well, Content ID works if the author gives some news to YouTube. So the hope, what I hope is that in the future with the blockchain, all platforms will have the chance to verify by themselves if there is an infringement of copyright, simply taking a look to the blockchain register, national registers. So these are some features, some goals that blockchain can effectively reach. But there is something more. A lot of scholars wrote about another opportunity, which is not just to keep the national register in blockchain, but to use blockchain to sign contracts with consumers. So think about Amazon Music or Spotify or whatever. When you buy a music, and in this case, the contract is not on the blockchain. But the idea is that we will transform that market in a different market based on blockchain. So there will be some coins, tokens for each music, each ebook, each file, picture, for example, that you have the right to download, to stream, to watch, to see, to hear, and whatever. So the idea is that in a couple of years, I will not just simply buy the right of listening to a music, but I will buy a token allowing me to listen at the music. And this is an important step, because if every transaction from the author to the licensor, to the licensee, and from the licensee to the consumer will be registered on the blockchain, well, this will increase control over licensee, because we will be able to verify how many streaming they do, where do they work, and so on. And they make more effective payments for authors, because, well, it's a complicated topic, this, but basically is that making a smart contract between consumers and Spotify or Amazon Music will mean that the contract can have the ability to split the payments, a small part to the author and a small part to the intermediary. So authors can have an immediate payment, and they know how many musics have been sold or how many books have been sold on the net, while today they do not have those kind of informations, because all those information are stored in the databases of the platforms, so like Amazon and so on. And finally, there is another advantage in this architecture, which is commoditization. Well, actually, I don't trust it too much, but as I think it's curious, I wanted to give you notice also about this. People think that it's not really nice for consumer not to have the chance to buy something digitally. I mean, if I buy an ebook, I have the chance to read it, but I cannot sell it again, or I cannot lend it to a friend or something like this, because there are some problems that technical features that prevent me from doing this. And so with this coin, I know that a person has the right to buy. So it has some more powers than if he wants just to have a streaming or to have the right to use the book. So Google Books has launched a project which is about commoditization of electronic resources through the blockchain. And that's an important point too. So I think I'm ready to conclude. And my conclusion is that nowadays, several national registration and recordation authorities are planning to transform, to change their ledgers, which are now centralized, into a transparent private blockchain. In Italy, our authority, which is SIAE, is working on a project like this, and the same, I think, is happening. I know is happening everywhere. But such a blockchain, it's a revolution. It can be something like a revolution, because blockchain, the fact of using blockchain is not a guarantee of everything. Such blockchain will not be more immutable because it's a centralized database. So using a private blockchain will not give it the immutability characteristics, nor will help us on paternity or double spending. So be careful. Calling it blockchain will not solve every problem, but it can do something positive as well, which is increase the opportunities for authors to raise money, and can also lead to reduce the risk of piracy and provide a safer storage, because you can store something on the blockchain means that it will not be that it is a secure ledger, more secure than other ledgers that you can imagine. So it's half and half. From one way, it's not, it doesn't achieve anything more, but for other aspects, it's a great opportunity. We said that everybody is thinking about a private blockchain. The intellectual property organization spoke about a private blockchain, and all the projects are about private blockchain. But you know that blockchain was born to be public, that blockchain has much more functionalities when it is public. So why not a public blockchain? You know that establishing a public blockchain for copyright could create a worldwide register, because if it is a public blockchain, means that everybody can have access. Well, the problem with public blockchain, it would be amazing to have a public blockchain, but it's difficult to find a consensus protocol, which means what's the governance of that blockchain? Because in Bitcoin, you know that there are miners, and miners, they get some money for their job. But who would pay for, which miners can we ask for in a copyright world? Maybe we can, but it's a technological challenge we have to solve. So as it is complicated, and as people want to go further step by step, it is fair. It is something that I can understand, that there are more debate on private blockchain. And I think that this would be also the best solution, to create a worldwide private blockchain. So not just with one national authority for one blockchain, but to create a worldwide blockchain and every authority in every country acting as a node. So this would be something private, but public in a way. And probably it will be a good opportunity to have just one register. Now we have too many national registers. And it's a good opportunity to use blockchain to find interoperability and to find agreement on standards and make something in common. And finally, as I told you, if we will be able not just to create an IP register, so the register for copyrights, but also a blockchain register for consumers, then blockchain can bring some additional benefits to copyright management. But there are two different level of application of blockchain, and sometimes in many papers they are mixed, like blockchain is for everything. And so to conclude, really just a final word is that blockchain has some potential, but we have to understand exactly what they are and distinguish if we apply blockchain to the copyright or to the works that are covered by copyright, because there are two different levels and you cannot mix them. So this is my take-home message, and I thank you so much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this short presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor Claudia. It was very interesting. I had not read something about blockchain and intellectual property in a long time, and I surely learned a lot. And I'll make here two quick questions so we can go next to Professor Nicholas. People asked about the scalability issues on blockchain and how to expand the use of blockchain safely in technical aspects. And the other question, the first question is from Ranjo Trindade, and the other question is from Rodrigo Glasmeyer. If the blockchain is private or depends on some authority such as WIPO to be trusted, can it work without the need of for proof of work processes?
Yeah, well, they are both on technical features. And the first one about scalability, yes, I agree. If you want to upload the entire work protected by blockchain, then there can be a problem of scalability, because a lot of data on the blockchain, then it could become very difficult to upload it. So actually, people are working on projects thinking about putting on the blockchain simply a string, so a hash function, like in Bitcoin. But you could also think about something more, as I said, and that in that case you have a scalability problem. And the second question was about the central authority. Yes, of course, speaking about private blockchain is something strange because blockchain is public by nature. But we have to find a balance between the functioning of blockchain. So proof of stake, proof of work, it's a technical problem. It's not a matter of law, I think. So if technicians are able to build an effective blockchain, then I can tell you that it would be safer, because more nodes you have, more immutability you have. But let's find a balance. So I think that for today, it's 2020. I think it's a good goal to have us mid-private, mid-public blockchain would be administered by more authorities, or even just once.
Thank you, Professor Claudia. So I think we can go move next to our next speaker. Professor Nicholas, very glad to have you here. Professor Nicholas Guggenberger, sorry if I pronounce this wrong about it, is a clinical lecturer in law, research scholar in law, and the executive director of the Information Society Project at Yale Law School. His research focuses on the intersection of law and technology, specifically platform regulation, privacy, the automation of law, and the future of private law. Professor Nicholas, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Pedro, for the kind introduction. And also thanks to Claudia for this presentation. Really interesting, very much enjoyed it. Yeah, we're going to switch to a different topic. I was planning to talk a bit about digital platforms and the current environment, especially with respect to potential measures, policy measures that could enhance the competitiveness of the digital economy. And what I want to focus on is, I want to focus on a paper that I've recently written in which I try to formulate the argument that we should grant competitors access rights to certain digital platforms. And by doing so, or in doing so, I borrow a bit from the logic that underlies intellectual property, more generally speaking. So with that preface, let's get started. So my main argument in what I wanted to share is that digital platforms have become essential infrastructure for the digital economy. In my paper, I argue that we should grant competitors equal and fair access rights to platforms where we think that the market does not provide reasonable alternatives. I go beyond that and I argue that in a second step, we should upend the platform's monopolies entirely. Now, in the following, let me give you a brief overview of the argument. I will explain a bit around the state of the platforms now, of the state of the platform economy. I will say a bit about the legal doctrine on which I will base my argument, the essential facilities doctrine, the antitrust essential facilities doctrine. And then if there's time, I will spend a bit on defining the guardrails that could help to renew the essential facilities doctrine and put it into practice, and point out some points on the application and implementation of such a renewed antitrust essential facilities doctrine. To start with, I think we can learn from the past because we're at a point at which we've been before. And apologies for that. The contributions I'm going to make are mainly based on the landscape and the state of the market in the United States. Yet I think that many of the characteristics of that market are pretty much the same in many other countries, in many other jurisdictions. Certainly in Europe, certainly in parts of Middle and South America, and certainly in large parts of the rest of the world that is not China. So my first point is we have been here before. And in the early 20th century, for example, in many countries, the railroads controlled critical infrastructure. Now in the United States and several other countries, these railroads formed the critical infrastructure that underlied commerce more generally speaking, and they were privately owned. They were not necessarily owned by the government. These railroad companies had monopolies over certain sections of the infrastructure, and in response to that, meaning in response to the railroad's power to exclude rivals, to exclude other businesses, and in response to them actually doing it, the US Supreme Court developed an approach that later became known as the Essential Facilities Doctrine. That approach mainly said that if you own a piece of infrastructure, a portion of the infrastructure that cannot be replicated, that others depend upon, then you need to give others, meaning competitors, access under reasonable conditions. Now, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and others behave just like the railroads did about 100 years ago. What they do is they leverage their exclusive control over search engines, over e-commerce platforms, over app stores, over social media, and abuse that to exclude rivals. The clear remedy, again, is to grant competitors fair and equal access to essential digital platforms. Well, the problem is that over the last 35 years or so, in many countries, the Essential Facilities Doctrine has fallen prey to excessive trust in self-correcting markets, and specifically so in the United States. I argue that it's high time to revive, renew, and to expand the Essential Facilities Doctrine as a crucial element, but not as the sole element of a comprehensive toolkit to strengthen competition and to spur innovation. Now, what does that have to do with IP? I will lay it out very briefly and we can go into more detail later. The parallel to IP is the following. In IP, there's a general logic that we grant monopolies in order to incentivize innovation. We say in copyright, in patents, specifically, you have the exclusive right to do something for a limited amount of time, and we allow you to reap monopoly profits, and we do that to incentivize you to create something, whether it is to invent something, that's patents, or whether to create something, a work of art, that would be copyright. Now, one could long argue about the underlying logic of trademarks and trade secrets, but I'll leave it with copyright and patents. Well, the core of all the copyrights, meaning of all the copyrights, all the patents granted in all the jurisdictions, is that those are monopolies for a limited amount of time, and with a limitation of the scope to which they apply. That is a fundamental insight that has been completely lost in antitrust. In antitrust, for some reason, we just trust that dynamic innovation will come from itself and will topple the existing monopolies. As we can see with large digital platforms, that's empirically just not the case. That is just not happening. I'll go into more detail why that is. So that's the first point I want to make. I want to borrow from the logic of IP, transfer that back into antitrust and say, well, if we have an enduring monopoly, then at some point we just need to end that monopoly. I suggest that we end it in two steps. First, we should grant competitors fair and equal access to existing monopolies. And if the monopoly endures longer, we should upend the monopoly entirely. And we can talk about how that could work. Now, let me give you a bit of detail on why I think those monopolies are so stable and why they can't be overcome and why, by pure market forces and by pure dynamic competition, and what's happening at the moment. So digital economy has grown to about $2 trillion in the United States in terms of the contribution to the US GDP. It's dominated by large platforms mainly. If you look at e-commerce, everything is Amazon. If you look at app stores, everything is either Google or Apple. If you look at search, everything is Google. If you look at social media, everything, close to everything, is Facebook. And if you think that Twitter is a is a real competitor, then you're probably in a filter bubble. What those firms have done, they have all vertically integrated. Amazon is not just a platform, it's a merchant, it's a payment processor, it's a huge logistics company with its own trucks, with its own warehouses, with everything. Everything is vertically integrated. And now that has advantages. You have very low starting costs as a potential vendor. You basically just open up a shop, meaning you just sign up like you would sign up on Facebook, and you are a vendor. Starting costs are incredibly low. That's to the advantages. That has huge disadvantages in terms of competition to Amazon. There is nobody, seriously, literally nobody seriously competing with Amazon. If you look at Apple and Google, they're not just app stores. They operate their own apps. They supply their own apps. They have from Gmail to Calendar, to various tasks apps, to maps, to the search, to a mobile search. They provide a huge array of apps that they offer on their own app stores in competition with independent app providers. If you look at Google as a search engine, the same applies. Google as a search engine has long vertically integrated. Google offers direct answers, which they think are better than like linking to external sources. Google provides its own content derived from its own services to provide direct answers. And Google has its own vertical search engines. Vertical search engines are search engines that's focused on a certain subject, such as flights, Google Flights, or such as hotel booking. Google has its own hotel booking comparison sites, such as Google Shopping. Those are vertical search engines that are integrated in the horizontal search engine, which is the general Google search engine. Facebook, pretty much the same thing. It's not as obvious, but Facebook did vertically integrate. Facebook has its own. Facebook is basically an app store in its own right, and yet it has its own apps on its own app store. Facebook is also a video hosting platform. It doesn't only link to videos that are on YouTube or elsewhere. It has its own video hosting and video streaming capacities. If you look at Facebook ads, Facebook has vertically integrated a huge chunk of the machinery behind the ad matching and the ad spot markets. Now, two problems arise from that, meaning from, first of all, the monopoly position of these platforms, and second of all, their vertical integration. Let's start with the vertical integration and with the conflicts of interests. What clearly emerges that they have an incentive to exclude. They have an incentive to exclude others wherever there is profit to be made. If you want to have more detail on that, I recommend the recent hearings in front of the US Congress. Was very helpful, but also several competition agencies around the world have written extensive reports documenting the exclusionary behavior. I would specifically recommend the CMA's, meaning the UK Competition Authorities report, which if you look at all the appendices, I think is around 1,000 pages or so. It's astonishing. It is astonishing. Now, some examples of that: Amazon uses data, meaning transaction data from its vendors, to undercut those same vendors. It replicates the vendor's products. It copies them. It then, and that's the most grotesque example, it uses the transaction data generated by the vendors. It basically puts out an identical or very similar product that's then called Amazon Basics. It then preferences that product in the search on Amazon. It places it in the buy box and so on. That means that if you're an independent vendor, now all of a sudden you don't only have your product copied, but you now have to pay to play, meaning you have to pay for advertising expenses so that Amazon again places you in the spot in which you might have been placed anyways because you have the most popular product. Yet, since Amazon copied your product and just placed its own product at the top of the list, you basically have to pay to get your old position back. Amazon does many other things that are highly dubious. It generally favors its own products and products that are shipped by Amazon when it comes to the inclusion in the buy box. The buy box is the little box where you can immediately buy stuff, and that accounts for around 80% of all sales, simply because most customers, if I remember correctly, I think 17% of all customers don't even check anything beyond the buy box. They just buy whatever is in the buy box. So that's a huge bottleneck. Amazon draconically punishes sellers that that for some reason breach the terms of services. Even if it is a very minor breach, it can be the case that you're just deplatformed, meaning your entire business is shut down. Why is your entire business shut down? Because you crucially rely on Amazon. There is no other game in town. If you look at the app stores, pretty much, very much of the same is happening. App stores self-preference their own apps. Their terms of service are highly exclusionary. If you look at what happened to the online game Fortnite recently, it got kicked off the platform simply because it dared to offer a payment option where you can pay Fortnite, meaning the company behind Fortnite, directly for in-app purchases instead of going through the App Store. If you look at search, again, self-preferencing is happening. The famous case in that respect is Google Shopping in the EU, and now the Department of Justice in the United States launched a complaint against Google for pretty much the same thing. YouTube, one of the Google subsidiaries. Google as a search engine is set to preference YouTube videos over Facebook videos. So it's, even the other big tech companies are not secure from being discriminated against. Google has moved to providing direct answers based on third-party content instead of linking to that contrast. That is in stark contrast to what Google thought was the best thing to do in the beginning, in the early days of its search engine. And Facebook is invested in very much the same practices. Now, the second big problem, I said the first big problem is exclusion. The second big problem is the extraction of monopoly rents. So depends on the jurisdiction that you come from. In the United States, the extraction of monopoly rents is generally not seen as a antitrust problem. Generally, I have to say that's different, very different in the European Union, where if you have a dominant position, you're more or less barred from extracting monopoly rents, meaning you're more or less barred from charging the highest price that you could be charging. I'm not aware of the situation in Brazil. Now, in what's happening is that many of the platforms are clearly charging super competitive prices. Now that, if we stick with the example of the app stores, is the 30% Apple tax that Apple puts on in-app purchases. And that is the reason why Fortnite, which I mentioned earlier, tried to circumvent the App Store and basically offer a payment method, a direct payment method. Apple takes 30% of all in-app purchases. That is enormous. A court in California has recently said that it is very likely that this would be considered super competitive. So this is the second set of problems. We have the first set of problems is exclusion. The second set of problems relates to the extraction of monopoly rents. All these monopolies are mainly based on network effects. Network effects means that adding additional users creates additional benefits to the network and to other participating users. And these network effects, these efficiency gains, they translate into market entry barriers for any potential competitors. So the classic example is a telephone network. If there are only 2 people, it has limited use. Once you have 20 people connected to it, it has some use. Once you have millions of people to connect it to it, it's incredibly valuable. And the interesting thing about network effects is that an additional user increases the benefit for all the other users. Now, that's a good thing to start with, but the problem with that is that once these large networks have developed, it's very, very hard to develop a competing network. And that is true for Facebook. That is true for search engines like Google. That is true for online platforms like Amazon. Sometimes these network effects are direct network effects, which means that the more users there are, the better it is for the other users. Sometimes those network effects are indirect network effects. That means that another market side benefits from the additional users. So that would be the case if you look at advertisement. The more people that use Google as a search engine, the more interesting it becomes for advertisers to advertise on Google. The more sellers there are on Amazon, the more interesting the platform becomes for customers, and vice versa. These network effects create huge market entry barriers and have basically created stable monopolies. Now, one can always argue, well, those network effects and those monopolies, they incentivize the creation of new competing networks. The problem is it's just not happening. It is just not happening. If you look at one of the richest and biggest companies in the world, Google was not able to launch a competitor to Facebook. They stopped their endeavor of Google+. It was just not happening. They had no chance whatsoever. Now, this is where the essential facilities doctrine comes in. It basically says, well, if a monopoly is stable and if it can't be replicated, then we should grant competitors fair and equal access. And that's what the Supreme Court did in the early 20th century, 1912. And it granted competitors access to existing railroad routes. Specifically, it was a bridge, and it was a ferry company that helped to cross the Mississippi River in St. Louis, which was a central point in the infrastructure of the United States back then. It was the gateway to the West. It connected the newly explored West, specifically California, with the industrious Midwest, that's up in Chicago and so on, and the further developed East Coast. This essential facilities doctrine was practiced and enforced by the courts over a course of maybe of about 70 years or so. It had its heights in the 1980s, and from there on, a sort of Reagan-Thatcher inspired revolution swept through antitrust and more or less ended the essential facilities doctrine as a legal doctrine. Beginning in the early 1990s, the courts chipped away pieces from the doctrine, made it harder to enforce. And in 2004, the courts in the United States gave the essential facilities doctrine more or less a final blow. Since then, it's been understood to be basically inactive. So what I argue is we should take these insights from IP law that I mentioned earlier on and make it clear that, yes, allowing monopolies to exist might be a way to incentivize innovation. Yet these monopolies have to end at some point. First part would be to grant competitors access rights. Second step would be to upend monopolies directly. It's pretty clear how to do the first part. Well, we just allow them to access the platforms according to equal conditions. Second would be we upend them. That's a bit more complicated. And the probably most helpful remedy would be to allow for horizontal interoperability. meaning to force them to become interoperable on a horizontal level. Now, what would that mean? Let's look at that in practice. That would mean that another platform could post, that another e-commerce platform could post its products to Amazon customers. That would mean that a vendor on Amazon can post products to customers that are on other platforms. If we look at social media, that would mean that if you are on Facebook, you can message somebody who's on Twitter. Why? Because we forced Facebook to open up its APIs and to allow Twitter to connect to it and to transport a message to Facebook. And that sounds revolutionary when it comes to digital platforms, but it's crucial to understand that we take that for granted in other networks. If we look at the phone networks, which are run by different companies, in most of the countries that the panelists here come from, mobile networks are run by various different private companies. And yet it's completely self-evident that you can call somebody who's on a different network. It is a given. You can text somebody who's on a given network, and depending on the services that you use, you can video call somebody who's on a different network. Now, for some reason, we have not applied the same logic to digital platforms. We've allowed them to become walled gardens. We've allowed them to create their closed ecosystems. And that is one of the reasons why it is so hard for a new venture to come in. I will try to come to an end because I see that because I want to leave time for Q&A and don't want to take up too much time. Next speaker. I want to make two last points. One is that I briefly mentioned is that the essential facilities doctrine can only be part of a larger toolkit. I think it is crucial that we put all the options on the table, potential breakups, functional separations between platforms and commerce, regulatory interoperability requirements that are not tied to the essential facilities doctrine. I think we should look at sector-specific regulation as well as privacy regulation. And I think it is important to consider whether we need to reform the way we tax digital platforms. That is all to say that I don't think that the essential facilities doctrine is a cure-all. I think it is a crucial element. Last point is I want to share sort of a hopeful note, because when over the last couple of years, when people spoke about the essential facilities doctrine in the US, then the response was always, well, courts will never, ever embrace that. Nobody will ever do that. That is dead. Well, not anymore. Not anymore. If you look at the antitrust, if you look at the recent report by the subcommittee on antitrust of the Democratic majority in the House, that specifically embraces the essential facilities doctrine. That is revolutionary compared to where we were before. Now you might say, well, that's the liberals, right? That is the ones that want to have more regulation. Well, if you look at the Republican counter report, the so-called Buck report, the Republican minority specifically endorses the essential facilities doctrine. They don't go along with many of the other measures, but they specifically endorse the essential facilities doctrine. And it is crucial to understand why that is the case. And that is by no means limited to the United States. The reason why that is that traditionally, antitrust has been divided into business interests and consumer interests. I'm oversimplifying, but that's been kind of the state of play for the last 50 years or so. What's happening now is that a significant part of the economy, smaller, medium-sized businesses, non-digital businesses, are simply cut out of the digital economy by these digital platforms. And all of a sudden you have an opening. You have a divide in the business community itself. The US Chamber of Commerce is divided on what approach they should be taking to antitrust. If you look to Europe, various business associations are divided what route they should pursue. There's internal fighting going on. And that is the opening where a more progressive notion of antitrust can be successful even in a business community dominated environment. And with that hopeful note, I want to close. More than happy to take any questions that may arise or just pass it on to Manon. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry for that. Just lost my tablet here for a second.
Pedro, may I have a question to Nicolas?
Yeah, sure. Please go on.
I was wondering whether in the US you are working on something like Digital Single Service Act or something like this. Do you think there is similar approach, or because you are claiming for something which is different also from Digital Single Service Act?
There is nothing that compares to the DSA. There is not at the moment. So first of all, there's gridlock in Congress. Second of all, I would not expect anything as sweeping and as cross-cutting to come out of any of the legislative proposals, to come out of any of the discussions. Third, the Democrats are all but barred from taking the Senate, which means that there's nothing to expect along these lines, simply because there's no Democratic majority in the Senate, and that would hinge on a Democratic majority. Next, what I think is much more likely is that we see more insular approaches. So, for example, there were some hopeful initiatives in the still present outgoing Congress. The Amy Klobuchar introduced an antitrust act. I don't recall the name, but it was Amy Klobuchar, Senator Blumenthal, and the third senator sponsoring it. And what they basically wanted to do is they wanted to go back to the version of antitrust that existed before the conservative courts dismantled it. If you want, that is a step towards that is one step towards a more European approach to antitrust. And then, if you look at the other areas, privacy is usually discussed completely separately. I think for no good reason, but it's just the case. I don't see a national privacy bill around the corner. In the early days of the CCPA, the California approach to privacy, there was some hope, I guess, that that people would say, well, before we have like a state-by-state solution, meaning California does its own thing, other states might do their own thing, let's do something on a national level. That has not happened, and the CCPA will just be in force and will be operating. And once it is operating and once companies have started to apply it, then this argument of like avoiding to adapt to something that might differ on a state-to-state basis, that argument falls. And then we might just end up with, I think, one of two options. Either everybody embraces what California does, or we do get a splintered landscape of different provisions.
Okay.
I have a question and a comment for Professor Guggenberger. I really enjoy your presentation, and I was wondering what you think of. Back in July, KI, the organization I work for, sent a letter to the FTC asking that they require Facebook to be more interoperable. And it was actually outlining a lot of the issues you are talking about. But I was wondering if the FTC would be a good way to push for the kind of anti-monopolistic attitude. In other words, how can we break the monopoly in many different ways? I'm from the generation where you couldn't buy a computer unless Microsoft was on it, and we had to break that. So there's different ways to do it, and I was wondering what you think of the FTC avenue, and if you would be interested in maybe collaborating on more work on this.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I think one should try all routes that are possible. I also participated in one of the contributions that went to the FTC, the one that was sponsored by Open Markets, there the hope is that they would ban certain types of behavior. The problem with that is that to see more sweeping change, I guess the courts would need to embrace a different approach to antitrust, because if they don't, they will just strike down whatever the FTC does, right? So and to that I see two ways. One is to just hope that the courts will eventually change their view on antitrust. Whether that's going to happen, I have no clue. I think it's very doubtful given the plenty of appointments that the Trump administration was able to push through. The second one is simply legislation. And that is the avenue where before this election, I have been very hopeful, meaning if we had gotten or if the US had gotten a Democratic majority in the Senate, then I could have seen that a ambitious antitrust bill could have sailed through. Whether that is possible with a divided government, I am very doubtful. What I can see is sort of insular solutions, and I mean the essential facilities doctrine could be one of them, right? If you see that there's Republican support building around this idea, and if you see that Democratic support is already in existence around that idea, you can more or less take the essential facilities doctrine and just write it up as a statute. Like there is nothing that would hold you back. That wouldn't cure everything, of course, but it would be one piece of the puzzle. To come back to your main question, yes, I think one should pursue all these routes. I'm more than happy to send you the link to the contribution that I participated in with Open Markets.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Thank you, Professor Nicholas. This is surely one of the most important talking topics of our
one very last point. If you do wanna read the stuff that I just summarized, the paper is in SSRN. It's called Essential Platforms. I don't know whether I can post. Can people see it if I post it in the chat here, or is that just for us?
Our technical support will send from here to the YouTube chat.
And I also put together a short explainer video that you can find on YouTube. Again, just Google or search on YouTube for Essential Platforms. Thank you very much. Really appreciated it. And thank you for the questions.
Thank you, Professor Nicholas. As I was saying, this is surely one of the most important talking topics of our time. In the internet governance community in Brazil, there was already a strong debates about applying antitrust laws and about the monopoly power of the big tech. So this recent movement around these ideas is surely interesting, not only in a global, not only in the US debates, but also to a global discussion and mainly to the Brazilian arguments around this kind of problem. So without further delay, I would like to get on to our next speaker and the third and last speaker of the session, which we are really, really happy to have you here as well. This has been a great session and it's going to end up even better. So please, Professor Manon, I will just make a small introduction and pass the word to you. Professor Manon is the Director of Information Society Projects at Knowledge Ecology International, a non-government organization with offices in Washington, D.C. and Geneva. She's an active participant of the World Intellectual Property Organization meetings of the Standing Committee on Copyright and Related Rights, and other multilateral and regional forums that discuss intellectual property rights, innovation, and related topics. Professor Manon, the floor is yours, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you very much. Last time I was in beautiful Curitiba, I took a lot of pictures after a road trip, but unfortunately they're all on Facebook and I left Facebook, so I can't get them very easily anymore. to do the link with the previous speaker, Professor Gegenberger, I'm so mad at Facebook because of that. And I'm very happy to be back here in a way. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm between lunch and dinner and cocktail hours for some people, so I'm sorry I'm the last speaker for you guys. Since Pedro was so nice and introduced my organization, I would just mention that one of the point of our organization is to find new solutions to managing resources. And so it is very telling that blockchain is a possible innovation, even though peer-to-peer networks sitting on the internet have existed for quite a while in my lifetime. But it's also about, we work quite a bit about incentive and finding new ways of incentive creation, because monopoly, as Professor Gegenberger mentioned, has to end at some point. And what we see, whether it's on copyright or on patent, and we work on both, is that the extension of the monopoly is actually preventing innovation and creation. But today I will focus on a very specific problem of our time, which is the time of pandemic. How to get better access and better access to knowledge and information in times of pandemic. I think that the whole world right now is shut down in some ways. We have trouble getting to schools or getting our children to school or having students in school, and we don't all have a beautiful library like some of us has. And it's more and more telling that people are counting on digital collections. Now, what I'm going to talk to you about today is how does it work? What is CDL, which is the way to get access to digital thing. Let me see if I can share my slides. And I've put a lot of citation on my slides, so if I go too fast on some things, please send me a note and I will send you my slides, or I'll send them to the tech support. Let me see if I can do this. Share. Where's my? Oh, I can't share. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. We can see your.
You can see my slides. So
yeah,
I'm going to do the presentation. Oops. Okay. So I'm not a librarian. I'm a patron of libraries. Let's see. But we all know that one of the fundamental socially beneficial function of libraries in all parts of the world is to provide broad access to information and learning material, and that it is crucial not only to maintain our economic stability, but also our cultural recovery when eventually this pandemic is under control. So right now, there's different laws in different countries and different regions, and there's also different community practices, because it's not all about the law. Sometimes the law is behind community practices. But basically everywhere, libraries are lending books and other materials. And while we are struggling to find enough material for children or for ourselves, I'm thinking a lot of the workers that lost their job who are trying to retrain, for example. Thinking about students. I don't know how it works in your universities, but When I was teaching quite a long time ago, we had to put books on reserves to make sure that some students would have them. Now they can't go in the reserved room of the library. So how does it work? So I'm going to examine some of the practices in the US and in Europe and see if you can come up with better ideas than what we have. So what is CDL and how does it work? So controlled digital lending, as the name indicates, is control, it's digital, and it's lending. And it has 3 fundamental principles. And it's very important. It's about physical book. A library must own the book, and it must make sure that it only loan the book to one person at a time. So it's one scan, one book, one reader. And it's control because the library must use technical protection measures to ensure that the digital file cannot be copied or distributed. And you all know that you can't download very easily some of these books. So it is basically doing what a traditional library does. Libraries lend books, and right now libraries want to continue lending books. So they scan books and they try to lend them to one reader at a time. That's the basic of CDL, controlled digital lending. I'm giving you this definition because some people are very familiar with it, but it doesn't exist everywhere. And I was quite surprised myself when I found that in some part of the world, there's no lending, whatever. No legally. So I would advise most of you to look at a white paper on controlled digital lending if you want to know all the details that exist, by David Hanson, who is a university librarian at Duke University, and Kyle Courtney, who is a copyright advisor at Harvard Library. And they will give you everything you need to know about CDL. But you basically know what CDL is. CDL is when you scan a book on a scanner, right? It's not always good for the books. I don't advise you to do that with your precious book, but sometimes you have to do it. And it gives you something like this, which is good, but it's not, of course, as good as what we call a digitally born copy, right? It's a picture of a book. It is still useful for people with low vision, for example. It might not be good enough for people who are blind or visually impaired and need to have not only searching capability on the text, but also to have the book read aloud. So now, to be honest, the vast majority of books that are scanned by libraries, such as the Internet Archive, are in the public domain, or if they still in copyright, they're not they're older, they're out of print, you can't buy them, or they're orphan works, which is really the 20th century book problem. I think there's a lot of books, you can't buy them, you can't ask for permission to scan them because who is the author? Many books, and it was discussed at a recent meeting on CDL, many books that are scanned today have very low market value. And we're thinking about local history or family history, a lot of self-published books, or books who are in rare languages. And that is fairly important because if rare languages are disappearing right now, and if we can't save the books in those languages, it's really going to disappear. And it's probably very important in countries where you have so many languages, or continent even. So how is it possible in the US? Because we are doing it. We are living through a CDL system in the US. The practice of CDL relies on 3 or 4, depending, US doctrines. The first is the first sale doctrine, which is Section 109. There's also the fair use doctrine, Section 107. I would add the exception for libraries, Section 108. And of course, there's Section 121 for people with disability, as well as case law. And as you know, case law is very important in the US. So I'm going to just talk to you about the Authors Guild versus antitrust. It's not a new case, but I think it's probably one of the most relevant for CDL at this point. The Authors Guild and other author organization and some individual authors claimed that the antitrust digital libraries had infringed their copyrights through its use of books scanned by Google. And it's what some people call the Google case, of course. But a federal court in 2012 ruled that what antitrust was doing was permissible under fair use. The plaintiff, of course, appealed, and they lost in 2014. But basically, just to make it short, but I would advise all law students to go and check out this case, which is very interesting and very dramatic in a way. Basically, the Authors Guild versus antitrust is a United States copyright decision that finding search and accessibility uses of digitalized book to be fair use. And I think that is the most important thing. Another very important doctrine that makes CDL possible in the US is the first sale doctrine. So it's Section 109, and without it, copyright holders could enforce rights in the secondary market, which would impact selling, loaning, or gifting any copyrighted work. Basically, the rationale is that once the copyright owner placed the copyrighted item in the stream of commerce on the market by selling it, it has exhausted its exclusive statutory right to control its distribution. You buy a book, it's yours. And of course, everything is changing now because, as the first speaker, Professor Zendei, mentioned, you don't really buy anything. You license or you borrow. But right now, when it comes to physical books and people are buying books, if you buy a book, you basically can do whatever you want with it. Then you have the doctrine of fair use, which is very important because it's a defense against a claim of infringement. It's a defensive move. It's clearly not a new concept in the US. It was developed by the courts beginning in the 1800s, and it was codified in 1976. So it took a while to become a law. If a person is sued for copyright infringement, this limitation, the fair use defense, along with other limitation on exclusive right, can be used to avoid liability. So rather than arguing that the protected work was not used without authorization, the argument is that the authorization is not required for this type of use. And it's a very limited type of use. And there are 4 factors, I put them on the slide here. There are 4 factors listed in 107, and they must all be considered, and they must not be treated in isolation from another. All are to be explored, and it's the result weighted together that makes it fair use or not. So just as a side, Section 107, like the first sale doctrine, fair use and the first sale doctrine are widely used by entire industries in the US, and very, very, let's say, powerful industry, including home recording device manufacturers, search engines, filmmakers, publishers, etc. rely on it. So it's not just the consumers and the users. It's also the businesses are using fair use all the time. But ultimately, the fair use question is whether the copyright law, the ultimate goal of promoting the progress of science and useful art, would be better served by allowing the use than by preventing it. And if the answer is yes, it's fair use. Then there's another important code that makes CDL possible, which is a limitation on exclusive rights for libraries and archives. And I think that's the one that a lot of libraries are looking at for CDL. Basically, a library has a special deal. Under certain condition, it is not an infringement of copyright for a library or an archive or any of its employees to reproduce or distribute a book. This is what makes libraries possible, basically. Another important code is 121. It's a limitation on exclusive right for people who are blind or other people with disabilities. And this is fairly important because it makes accessible formats possible to be used by eligible person. In other words, blind people or other people with disability, and I'm thinking dyslexia or all sort of disabilities, they can't hold a book or something, they have to have some kind of access to information and knowledge in an accessible format. And that's the law in the US, and that's the law in many countries, but it was recently reinforced by a treaty, the Marrakesh Treaty, signed in 2013, and which is controlled by WIPO. And Brazil was actually a very important proponent of that treaty at WIPO at the time. So I'm always very happy to mention that the Treaty of Marrakesh, which is the treaty that makes it possible to get accessible format everywhere in the world for all blind and people with disability, was born partly in Brazil. So in the US, it is widely used. Controlled digital lending is lawful in the United States, and people are using it. On this slide, you see all sort of places where you can find examples and laws and implementation of CDL. Now, right now, probably because of the pandemic, a group of publishers have challenged this practice in the US court, and they are suing the Internet Archive, which is well known internationally. It's probably one of the few international, truly global archive. And it lends out to one reader at a time, one scan, wherever you are. It doesn't depend on your IP address or what institution you are. Of course, it's a response to the pandemic, but it existed before the pandemic. It's just that it's much more important right now when people are stuck at home and not being able to go to campuses or libraries. Again, some of these early reaction to the pandemic was to, we call it in the US, the circling the wagon, you know, whether it's in the patent world or in the copyright world. In terms of pandemic, the owners, the rights owners, have decided that they had to maybe straighten the situation. So before turning to the European situation, I would like to just summarize briefly that in the US, the flexible doctrine of fair use with the first sale doctrine and some specific limitation and exception have allowed library to fulfill their mission to provide access to knowledge and information. All this is legal in the US because the control part is fundamental and there are various control mechanisms in place. With CDL, you cannot download the books, you cannot copy it, you cannot, and sometimes you can even read it just for a limited time and then the scan disappears after 2 weeks, which is often the case, actually. So you have to be a fast reader. Now, in Europe, the situation, of course, is very different. I was at 2 meetings recently with European who mentioned that what you see in Europe is a pure and weird chilling effect on libraries. Because when you look at the Court of Justice of the European Union, there are 3 very important decisions. The first of the 3 took place in 2014, and it was a German case known as 2 Darmstadt. And the ruling in 2 Darmstadt was, of course, welcomed by the European Library because it allowed them to digitize works in their collection and to make them available in library reading rooms. So you would say, well, they got below the case law here. And in November 2016, in 2 separate cases, one that began in the Netherlands, and I will go back to that case, and in France, there were 2 equally important issues decided by the court. One was about the lending of ebook by libraries, and the other was about requiring the author's consent for the digital exploitation of their work. So the ruling in Sully and Doc, the French case, had a direct outcome that an author or the people owning the rights must always be informed of 2 things: the proposed use of his or her copyright work and how consent for such use can be withheld. And that's an author's right situation. But in the interest of time, I would like to focus on the last case you see on your screen, which is very difficult to pronounce. It's in Dutch, so I'll call it the VOB case. And it's certainly the most pertinent as regard to whether CDL should be happening in Europe too. Let me see. So the Court of Justice ruled in November 2016 that library lending of electronic books, e-books, should be treated the same way as the library lending of paper books. And at the heart of this Dutch case is the question whether public libraries need a license permitting them to lend e-books, or whether they can lend them without a license in the same way as they lend physical books in their collection. And of course, in 2016, the judgment affirmed that the VOB's question makes it possible under Dutch copyright law to lend physical books as well as digital books. And it was absolutely the same, it should be treated the same way. Now, there are some conditions. And you see on the slide, they rule that it's legal, but there must be some condition met. First, it can only be 1 copy, 1 user model. The original copy must be, of course, from a lawful source. And some member states have to make some decision whether they wish to make e-lending conditional upon the first sale of the digital book within the European Union. And there's a kind of a not very clear, at least for libraries, way of finding out what the situation is when you're talking about digital books in any library. In a sense, the ruling for libraries was that they were not necessarily required to obtain a publisher license for the activity of e-lending, but there are too many gaps, too many uncertainty. And for libraries, it's chilling because they could be sued, they could be blocked, they could be closed. So even though they really welcome these decision of the European Court of Justice, they were, especially for example in the UK, where they know that they're supposed to get a license, there was too many uncertainty, and they decided to wait. And in the meantime, the publishers, for example, in Germany, at the beginning of the pandemic, I think it was for 3 months, they gave libraries a kind of a deal on their licensing fee, but only for 3 months. So it gave the upper hand to a lot of the licensing scheme instead of making it easier to lend the books, scan or not scan. Many advocates in Europe have told me that what they need is clarification. So if you want more information on the European case, and it could be actually quite relevant to the situation in Brazil, because you have the author's right, and it's I don't know if you had already some case law in Brazil, but these could be interesting. You can see I organize them a little bit differently, but VOB is probably the more relevant. But then you also have the Solian doc about the consent by the authors, and then 2 Darmstadt, which is about the retro digitization by libraries. But of course, more needs to be done in Europe and beyond. And I would advise you to look at Julia Reda's writing and also Professor Dussolier. They both participate in a transatlantic consumer dialogue workshop, which is on our YouTube channel at KI Online, and they both explained quite in details the European Court of Justice decision and the impact that it has, or the lack thereof in some cases. Now, on another related event, which was held in Colombia, the Global Congress, you can also see on the video available at KI Online, Jamie Love and Luis Villarreal, who are both experts in international law, and they can go into details about CDL in international context. I will try to be very brief on that because in the interest of discussion, and I'm hoping to hear your views about what should be done for libraries in the pandemic. But basically, when you look at the WTO TRIPS agreement, and I put down the article that I found most relevant to the CDL, you can see, for example, that Article 6 is exhaustion of right. It says, for the purposes of dispute settlement under this agreement, subject to the provision of Article 3 and 4, nothing in this agreement shall be used to address the issue of the exhaustion of intellectual property right, which makes it possible for the US to have the first sale doctrine, and which should make it possible for any country to have the first sale doctrine. You also have Section 8, which is the control of anti-competitive practices in contractual licenses. And I think that's also very relevant and very important. And then another international agreement that I think is worth looking at is the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And there's 2 articles that I think are interesting. The Article 13, which is, the primary education must be free for all. It recognizes the right of everyone to education. And this is great, right? I mean, unless it's not possible. And that's where when you look at Article 15, you understand that if you want the right of everyone to have education, you have to have the right to use the benefits of scientific progress and its application. But you also need to have the protection of the moral and material interest of any scientific, literary, artistic production of the author, right? So this is why I like the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, because it really presents the two sides of the coin. You have the right to education, but you also have to ensure the protection of the moral and material interest of the author. So this is just to give you an image of the state parties and signatories of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. As you can see, it's basically almost everywhere. The dark green states are state parties, and the light green states, the United States of America, are just signatories. Now, I would like to finish with one of the heroes of copyright, Victor Hugo. As you know, he was invited to make a speech at the International Literary Congress in Paris in 1878, where we commonly understand that the Berne Convention idea was explored, and the idea was to discuss how to protect authors. So he's a great hero and of the copyright world. But I would like to show you a quote from his speech to the Congress of Literary, Industrial, and Artistic Property in Paris, where he said, "The principle is twofold. Do not forget. The book, as a book, belongs to the author. But as a thought, it belongs, the word is not too extreme, to the human race. All intelligences, all mind, are eligible, all own it. If one of these two rights, the rights of the writer and the right of the human mind, were to be sacrificed, it would certainly be the right of the writer, because the public interest is our only concern, and that must take precedence in anything that comes before us." And I think that in terms of pandemic, it is very important to remember that we have to protect the author, but we also have to protect what Victor Hugo in his 19th century language called the human race. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Manon, to talk, since you asked during your presentation, to talk a little bit about the situation in Brazil. We actually have a very strict law. As you know, it's a little bit old. It was published already a little outdated, since the information technologies were not really developed on it. Like, they were already implemented, but the law wasn't expecting them to be as global, as popular as they became. So we have this closed list of limitation exceptions that do not encompass the limitation or exception to libraries to digitalize the work. But we have some good news in 2019, that we have something called the judicial statements, as a rough translation, that a group of scholars and judges from Brazil get together to things that we call journeys of civil law, of commercial law, of criminal law. And in the third journey of the commercial law of the Center of Judiciary Studies, they published the statement 115, which says that all exceptions and limitations of the copyright statute in Brazil should be interpreted extensively, with the purpose of adapting itself to the constitutional principle of the social purpose of property and the fundamental rights. So this is interesting. We don't have any case law specifically about it on our superior courts, but there is a little bit of a good perspective on that, since we hope that the judges will be, if they are presented to a case of digitalization by libraries and other cultural institutions, they will decide in favor of these institutions. But we don't know it yet. We just have some hope about it. Let me check if we have some questions here. People were praising your presentation, really interesting. And I have a small question about the European context that they have on the term directive, a specific rule that relates to the public domain that it's called, people called a publisher right before the real publisher right in the most recent directive, but it was about publishing works that were already in the public domain. So you get a 20, but were not published before. So you get a 25 years exclusive right on this newly published old works. So a lot of libraries and museums defend this exception, but there are a lot of critics saying that this is a privatization of the public domain, and that it actually is an obstacle to promoting the cultural heritage and cultural diffusion. So what's your opinion about this kind of new exclusive rights on works that were in the public domain but were not published? Is it good for the cultural heritage?
It's not good for the public. I mean, it's certainly an extension that is threatening the public domain. And I do think the public domain has a role to play for the authors too, and for creation. Nobody reads more books than authors. Nobody wants to get access to information and knowledge more than authors. And so it's really a publisher push, not an author's push, if you follow my meaning. And I think that right now we live in a world where you have the copyright, which is a publisher's right, and you have the conflict with author's right, which is about protecting creativity and authorship. And I do think that the copyright has been winning completely at WIPO and other institutions by extending all the time their rights and where they can get new rights. And the balance is totally skewed right now. And I'm really worried about that kind of push by the publishers. I do understand that it costs money to publish, and I do understand the publishers spend a lot of time and money on doing things. But I also think that we have to go back to more a balance of authors, readers, and publishers. Now, to go back to what you said about the Brazilian situation, I found it very interesting, and I'd like to see the text, because I think the pandemic changed the way we look at property. I don't know in Brazil, but in the US, for example, people could not, if somebody was renting a house and couldn't pay their rent, they could not evict that person. So the apartment is a property, but suddenly the property rule was different. And same thing for copyright. It's a property right, and it's been changed by the pandemic. Now, whether the changes are going to stay or they're going to be totally, we're going to go back to square one when the pandemic is under control, I don't know. But I'm interested in anything that shows that property is becoming a different, it was different to begin with the digitization, where you rent or you license or you borrow more than you own. But the pandemic is threatening that trend of the disappearance of property as we knew it. It's very interesting. I'd like to see what the text was in English.
Yeah, I just translated it here, and I will send to you as soon as I them. But I would like, since we are a bit over our scheduled time, but we are still in the time we got to finish it, I would like to give you both the floor once again to final considerations, if you'd like to say something to conclude your lecture. I believe we can change the order, and we can start with you, Professor Manon, then go to Professor Nicholas, just right after you.
Oh, so I start. Well, sorry. Well, I would like to thank, of course, the study group on copyright and industrial law in the graduate program at the Federal University of Paraná. And again, it's a great conference, and I've been following on YouTube different ones. I wish I had time to learn Portuguese. But I would say that it's a great honor to be invited here, and I really learned a lot, whether it's on blockchain, which I thought was like something else than it was. Now it sort of totally changed my mind about what it is. I'm really nervous about the privatization of these registration and copyright, and I'm also very happy to have met Professor Guggenberger, because I think we do a lot of work that would be informed by his scholarship. And I wish you all well, and thank you. If you need any kind of slides or more information about what I talked about, you can send me an email at my work email or my Gmail. They all work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, Professor Nicholas.
Yeah. Also from my side, what a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Great honor to be part of this great programming. It was a pleasure to meet you, Pedro, and it was a pleasure to meet you, Manon. Really great discussions. I much appreciated it. And to everybody who was watching, I wish you great rest of the conference, and I will switch over to YouTube again as well, and try to pick up something. Try to pick up something on the presentations that are in Portuguese. My Portuguese is non-existent, however. I'm very sorry for that. So I'll focus on the other content that's available in English. Thank you so much, really, for having us. This was a great discussion. I very much enjoyed it, and thank you for the questions as well.
I would like to thank you both once again. This was a really instructive and excellent session. So I would like to declare the ending of the morning session, and we will wait you all in the afternoon sessions, which will start at 13 p.m. at Brazilian time. Thank you, and have a nice lunch, or to those that are already late, nice afternoon and a nice night.